Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. I'm Lucy Hargreaves. I'm the CEO of Build Canada. And at Build Canada, we believe Canada can and should be the most prosperous country in the world. One of the ways we're going to get there is by sharing bold ideas from some of Canada's leading entrepreneurs who are shaping the future. Today, I am so excited to be joined for a conversation with Mina Mitry. Mina is the CEO and co founder of Kepler and one of Canada's most exciting space companies. He's also the author of a Build Canada memo on space and the space economy that made a big argument. Canada was once a leader in space, but we have fallen behind, and we need an industrial policy to reclaim our place in the new space economy. We're going to talk about that memo, but also Mina's personal journey as an entrepreneur, why he chose to build here in Canada, and what he thinks it will take for us to seize this moment of growth in our country. So, Mina, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me this morning. And let's start with your own story. I would love to hear, why did you decide to start a company in the space sector, and why did you decide to build it here in Canada?
Lucy, super excited to dive into this conversation, and thanks for having me, and also for the great work that Build Canada is doing. Um, so if I take a step back, kind of why did I start this particular company? It was actually bred out of work that I was doing in my undergrad, my master's at the University of Toronto. So if I take a time march back in the history, during my time when I was building when I was doing my undergrad, my master's, I built up a not-for-profit within the university. And within that context, we were designing, building, launching, operating satellites, rockets, drones for all sorts of competitions nationally, internationally. We grew it to a team of 100 volunteers, had a massive sponsorship base, and it was really eye-opening what was taking place in the space sector. And I think this is back in 2008 to 2012 time period, so really, really long time ago. Um, During that period, we got to learn things like mixing laughing gas, aluminum powder, and candle wax to make our own rocket engines from scratch, launch them to a 10,000-foot altitude, do scientific experimentation, and bring it back down. We built microbiology payloads, launched them into the International Space Station, did experimentation, and it was all for scientific purposes. But it was super eye-opening to realize that gone are the days where space is controlled by trillionaires. And when I say trillionaires, I mean with a big capital T. That's kind of like when nation states were the ones that were deciding what would take place in space. They controlled access, they controlled the development of technologies. The barrier to entry was $1 trillion. Now, it was a university team that got together and put a spacecraft up that built the realization that space access has fundamentally become democratized. There's massive reform and regulation that's happening globally. There's reduced barriers to entry by way of now we can take an Uber pool equivalent to get our satellites up into orbit. We've got a massive reduction in launch costs. We've got new and advanced technologies that are no longer classified or held behind the walls of these trillionaire states. We are now democratizing access to space. And we saw that there was such a tremendous amount of investment going into transportation, which is the rockets that bring us up into Earth's orbit, but very little investment was taking place in communications. So we set out to build this company called Kepler with the mission to bring internet access, the same way you and I are still enjoying internet here on Earth, but outside of Earth to bring real-time data that's being generated in space, whether that be for wildfire detection, radar imagery, or it could be for our communications, but just enabling real-time access to internet outside of Earth so that we can not only solve current day problems, but bring us to a spacefaring civilization. And so I thought that was an exciting mission that we could do here in Canada on the basis of all this great work that I'd done in Canada that taught me, not only do we have talent, but talent like top in the world talent. We have incredible, incredible access to know-how here from our proud space heritage in Canada. But really what we're lacking and why we lose a lot of talent to the, US and other areas is because we lack the ambition to support this really great talent coming in and saying, hey, I want to be the person who is the first in the world to develop a technology or to build on a bold and ambitious idea. And we don't have a lot of that in Canada.
We are going to dive into that later on in our conversation. But before we get there, I mean, I will say for our audience listening, if they don't know, and I think this is incredible, and congratulations to you for building this company. Kepler is Canada's largest satellite operator, and I think before you and I connected and got to know each other a little bit, I didn't know that, and so just huge congratulations for building that and scaling that to the scale that you have already in this country. When we think about Canada's history in the space sector, I mean, we were literally the third country in space, right? We had Alouette 1 in 1962, the Canadarm in the shuttle era. Um, how do you explain that sense of leadership that we had then as a nation versus sort of what we're seeing today, which, you know, some describe as stagnation, others use other words, but, we just seem to not be punching above our weight in the sector, and have seem to have lost some of that, ambition and motivation to be first.
Yeah, maybe I'll kind of riff off that and just describe that the current situation is pretty dire. So if you take a look, the Canadian Space Agency publishes regular data on revenues generated by the space sector. In 2017, we peaked at 5.5 billion in revenues for the sector. But by 2022, which I think is their latest published survey, we were down to 5 billion in revenues, and that's not inflation adjusted.
Right.
When you think of who are the biggest buyers of space technology and space capability, by and large, it's exported outside of Canada. So a lot of people are coming to Canada to buy capabilities, technologies from Canada, but that's been on a significant decline. So our revenues as a sector has dramatically dropped. And all the while, which is the most alarming part, the whole of the world has seen such significant acceleration in the use of space technology. You can read in your annual report that'll tell you the space sector is growing enormously during this time period. Um, Estimates put it at something like $1 trillion by 2040, which is an enormous economic opportunity for us. But we see a massive contraction inside the revenues in Canada. And so that typically means we're losing capability by and large because people are seeking that capability in other more capable countries that can serve their needs. And you see the whole of the sector is growing. Meanwhile, our share of that sector is dramatically reducing, even when you don't account for inflation during that time period. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, we now rank 12th in spending in the space sector and 22nd in terms of GDP share, and I was curious to get your take on, the countries who have passed us and are doing better. What did they do that we didn't? How are they thinking about their positioning in the sector, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these countries that do an amazing job to help build their internal industrial base, what they do is they go out and they set out a national space policy or national space strategy. The US and Japan do this really, really well, where they have this defined set of like, these are the three, four capability areas we really care to be number one or number two in the world at. And they define that, they explain it to all their industrial base and they create these anchor customer programs that get to see technology develop from its infancy through to maturation through to in-field deployment. And these anchor customer programs, they are highly levered. So they enable any company or any technology that's being developed to take a dollar of government revenue and leverage that three, four, five times with equity, debt, or other investments into the business that further accelerate the pace of development and enable greater scale of that particular technology. And we see that happen time and time again. That anchor customer framework created, billion-dollar companies in the US. It's doing the same in Japan and continuing to um, maintain an alignment between that total space strategy and an anchor customer framework that helps to accelerate, grow, and deliver on these companies that have strong space capabilities. Really, it will help us to become a world leader. That's what we had way back in the day in our ambitions to say we want to be a nation state that launches a satellite that operates on orbit. We had that same ambition when we said we're going to develop a Canada arm and use it to assemble the totality of the International Space Station, but we currently today feel a little bit rudderless.
Okay, let's dive into your memo. I loved this memo. I love all Build Canada memos, but I think it is when you think about the space sector, it is just something that is so obvious to be ambitious about, and it's quite it was quite astounding to me to read through the numbers, and the actual sort of challenges that we're facing. I loved your recommendations. But before we get into the recommendations, I wanted to unpack, from a personal perspective and a professional perspective, why did you want to write a memo for Build Canada? What was your motivation behind doing this?
I think it is so critically important to have a very capable space sector. As we see the world sort of turn from being completely peaceful to a place where we want to have better security, we want to have better control over the Arctic, we want to better understand what's happening day to day. Space is the way to do that. Space is the resource by which we're able to, get GPS data, which commands a lot of our infrastructure. It's the place by which we're able to collect wildfire data and be able to understand how wildfires are affecting and how are affecting our land masses, how they're moving. It's the place in which we can get our weather data. It is so enormously important to our day-to-day lives that it's obvious to me that we have to be a leader in it. Otherwise, we risk losing so much of our capability that we may not have sort of a credible space capability long term in Canada. And I think I chose to write this memo because I'm deeply passionate about both the space sector and the talent that we have here in Canada. And my team will always hear me emphasize this time and time again. We get to hire some of the top 1% people in the world. It's just incredible, whether they come from an electrical engineering discipline or mechanical engineering discipline or software discipline, kind of across the board, we breed some of the best talent in the world. And it pains me to see that we lose that talent because we just don't have the ambitious projects to support them.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, can we walk through your memo? There's three main recommendations in this memo. I would love for you to just take a few minutes and walk our listeners and our viewers through the three main ideas that you think will help us regain our leadership position in the space sector.
Yeah, so I think the recommendations are simple, and I wish they were novel, but they're not novel. They're well implemented all around the world, and we see them play out and provide advantage to countries that choose to operate in this way. I think the first one that comes down the list is to create a national space council that sits and meets on a regular basis, ideally with reporting directly to the PMO office. It would be awesome to have that to create an aligned space strategy across all the government departments that have a need and use for space so they can drive downstream requirements, create visibility, awareness, and have a clear messaging on what Canada wants to be number one or number two in the world at. That recommendation just takes time from people and it sets space as a real priority, which not only impacts kind of the industrial base to signal that the Canadian government really cares about space as a sector, has made it a strategic priority, but also helps garner more investment into the country. So that I think is the first recommendation, but happy to dive into it in more
Yeah,
detail.
I mean, is that something that Canada has considered before and not moved forward with, or is it just something like, is it something that has been discussed in the past? I'm curious, like, why we don't have that already, because it just seems like a fairly obvious thing to move forward with.
Yeah, so it's something that's been discussed, put in place, but never met. So I think back in 2024, we had established the Space Council, but the Space Council never met, never established its priorities, never developed a rhythm, and we're really advocating that we take all the great work that's already been done and bring it through to the finish line.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like a work in progress, and we just need to move forward with actually making that like a working body that is meeting and doing the work.
That's right, and I think we want to make sure we give it some real teeth so that has the ability to enact change, the responsibility, and the accountability.
Got it. Okay, and the second recommendation that you had in your memo.
A big thing we see at large in near any country is that they create this anchor customer framework. It is a very simple strategy to create clear visibility for an early stage development technology to go from prototyping to development to scale. And we're not talking about um, bringing out grants or offsetting funding contributions. The goal here really is to become an anchor customer to help early stage technologies go through their growth journey and to create a committed buyer at the end of that journey, with the government being an anchor customer. That has had a ton of merit in a lot of different countries that helps to enable, whether it be the NASA sort of venture class launches that help to build up SpaceX as an organization, or the commercial LEO destinations program that's ongoing right now, where they're looking to buy a replacement to the International Space Station and capacity on it rather than developing the technology themselves. We don't have that in Canada. What we have in Canada is sort of two polarizing bookends. On the one hand, we have these opportunities for really early stage funding. That would be SHRED, CDPs by the Canadian Space Agency, NRC, IRAP grants, things of that nature that are for that very early stage in development. And then on the other hand, we have these large programs of record. Think the RadarSat Next Generation program or RadarSat Plus, or the Canada Arm program. Those are things that are wildly scaled up, and we have nothing in between. So to cross that valley of death, what we often find is that companies will get started in Canada, and this was our same journey. We'll
Mhm.
tap into that very early stage development funding. We'll go see customers internationally, and where our largest customers are in the US and Europe. And then
Mhm.
we'll come back to Canada once we've built up our own, stable base and large capability to try and service our own government needs. And we found that, that has significant disadvantages, where a lot of these countries that we're exporting our goods to have more material and advanced capability that help us cross that chasm, so to speak. Where in Canada, we encourage companies effectively to just relocate abroad.
Yeah, we hear that time and time that same procurement story, we hear time and time again across sectors that companies, Canadian companies that are starting out here, most often are getting their first customers overseas and have to prove scale and success overseas before, they're getting access to enterprise level and government, procurement here at home. So that story is definitely not unique to Kepler or to the space sector, in general.
Well, I
Um,
think a great way to help manage all this, it's all risk managed. So if you go through these early stage procurements, you don't clear to the next gate of a larger scale procurement unless you've shown great capability. And I know we generally hold a risk averse culture in Canada, but with a stepwise incremental growth in what we're buying, but at least giving that clarity and giving that end state sort of customer that's going to be a buyer, going to be a user of your services, it goes such a long way and can be highly levered to bring on private investments, debt, or other sources of funding.
Got it. And then your third recommendation was around so that was around creating an anchor customer framework, and then your third recommendation was around mandating commercial services procurement and decentralizing execution authority. Can you walk us through that in a little bit more detail as well?
Yeah, so I think as with all really advanced technologies, very early on in the space sector, we had government mandating requirements, 1 through 10,000 on the good that they're looking to buy. So in their model, it's government owned. They're going to go procure a physical asset that could be a satellite, a spacecraft, whatever that they're looking to get built. And in order to do so, they're going to specify to a level of detail exactly line by line what they're looking for. And that creates really exquisite one-off systems. But the sector has advanced so dramatically right now that rather than specifying this laundry list of requirements, the government can be way better served by looking at commercial services instead, where the government specifies what are the 3 or 4 high-level requirements. We're looking for better imagery of this location. We want communications at these speeds, giving those high-level requirements to the broad industry, where I think there'd be a level of surprise and delight in terms of the capability that exists out there in the industry to service those high level requirements and can be fielded today. We see this example happen time and time again, where we look to build out and buy on the basis of these exquisite requirements. And on average, yeah, I think there was another memo I participated in where we saw that our average defense procurement timeline is 16 and a half years. which to me is wild to think of an industrial person. It'd be really hard to even think about serving those requirements because in 16 and a half years, I have no idea what shape or form our company would look like. And so trying to develop a capability and service to these government users makes it really challenging if they go down the path of their traditional procurement, where all these requirements exist. They try to buy a bespoke system, and then they mandate with a great degree of specificity. It just breeds cost overruns and it breeds schedule overruns. And then, really, us as the Canadian taxpayer were impacted by it. If instead the government were to go out and say, okay, we are looking to buy this service or this capability with a high level statement of what they're after, I think I'll repeat it again, there'd be delight to see what the commercial industries are able to provide to them. And we see this being an actual advantage to the countries that choose to buy from commercial services, as opposed to those that choose to build from a design specification. Because at the end of the day, we can't tolerate the timelines that are associated with building to those design specifications, and they favor, centralizing most of the industry towards one or two players as they're currently stated. So turning into a commercial services model is a huge advantage, but that's only one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is really helping to decentralize execution authority. We have this great example where we were awarded a contract in the US and a contract in Canada kind of at the same time. The one in the US was 100 times the value, the one in Canada. So that way, just to give you scaling perspective, it's almost a year later, and we're still not yet at the go line or have the contract in hand to sign with the Canadian side. Because what ends up happening is that the owner of the requirements is different than the person who's responsible for purchasing. And so we end up in this game of back and forth between the person who's purchasing and the requirements owner to try and get something papered. In the meantime, we have this contract in the US that was 100 times larger value, dollar value, that we started on within 30 days of the award. We had the contract in hand, signed, completed within 30 days of the award. We've been working on it for during this entire time duration. And so being able to decentralize the procurement authority so that you've got good procurement officers that understand the procurement rules, but really assigned into an organization that can go ahead and help to fast track those decisions and
Right.
enable just a greater pace of execution compared to what we're seeing right now.
Do you think there's a pathway to get there in Canada? Is that something that is being explored to your
I
knowledge?
think it just requires bold vision. I don't know that today we're exploring a path to getting there in Canada, but I think with the right vision, we can do this. We already have a great procurement organization, and so we can take advantage of all those resources that we've built inside of PSPC and have them be assigned internally to each one of these departments, so that we can decentralize the procurement authority.
Some really good ideas, very practical, and it sounds like, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Other jurisdictions have figured out how to move forward more quickly, in this sector of using some of the tactics that you've described. So really appreciate you sharing those. Maybe just to take a step back before we close this out, um, you argue that space isn't just about rockets or satellites. It's really the plumbing of the modern economy. And I wanted to just take a moment to unpack that with you. And what does that mean for Canada? I mean, we talk about being involved in the space sector as a very strategic, a geopolitically strategic move. I haven't heard the terminology plumbing of the modern economy before, so I was interested to hear that framing of it, and I wanted to just take the opportunity to, since I have you here with me live, just to ask you that question and get your thoughts.
Yeah, so I like to think of space as infrastructure in the same way that telecommunications infrastructure is part of our modern day plumbing, and in the same way that the sewage system is part of the plumbing for our current economy. Weather, and that be the weather data that we gather day by day that is driven from space. There's no other practical means where we can collect large scale weather data. That weather data comes from space. It enables us to plan shipping logistics routes. It could be the data that we gather for, and I talk about this application a lot because it's really near and dear to us as Canadians. Wildfire data that we are able to gather when we can see, predict, and avert. the wildfire passage, that's hugely impactful to our day-to-day lives. If it's GPS data, where the timing signals are used to plan, manage a lot of our energy grids. I think all these discrete data examples are embedded into our day-to-day lives. Without them, I think at one point in time I've given this talk where, and I'm sure there's other published papers that describe what would a day without space technology be, and we would anticipate kind of total shutdown of our power grids. We anticipate that there'd be stoppage in all of our networks because we still rely on GPS timing for modern networking. And so there's a whole slew of downstream effects. We just don't see it. It's not as prevalent in our day-to-day lives. We're not sat here communicating with a satellite, you and I. What we
Mhm.
are doing is that underneath all of our infrastructure, aka the plumbing, we have all these discrete space data products that are feeding everything that we do, and they enable us to kind of go on. But we don't pay attention to it too often. We don't recognize really the dramatic shift in technology and the capabilities that we've launched in space. But it is so essential to everything that we do day to day, and that's why I describe it as the modern plumbing for our economy.
Love it. What gives you optimism that Canada can still reclaim its place in space?
I see it firsthand. We breed top 1% talent in the world. It's incredible. From the technical side, we kind of have amazing universities that build the right talent pool. And the only reason why we're losing this talent is just if we don't have the right ambition for them to serve their desires to sort of become and claim their own place in the world. And so I get a ton of optimism just knowing the incredible talent pool that I get to see and work with all the time, and taking that talent pool and meeting them with the right ambition, I'm very confident we're going to be able to claim our place in space.
If you could leave one message with policymakers and builders who have joined us this morning or are listening to a recorded session of this, what would it be?
Uh, Urgency. We need to act now on some of these recommendations in order for us to be able to claim our place in space. If we wait too long to take into account some of these recommendations or others, we will really lose not only our talent pool, but we'll lose the critical mass of capabilities that we've built in Canada, and we'll have a continuously eroded space sector. So really, now is the moment in time for us to try and act. Not try and act, but to act in order for us to claim our place in space. If we don't do anything right now, I think we're in really dire straits and we risk losing a huge portion of our talent pool and a huge portion of our capability.
Mina, I'm going to close it off there. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful conversation. Um, what I'm taking away is that there's so much opportunity here in Canada in the space sector. And as you said, it's about talent, retaining our talent, taking the bold action to act now and not waste the opportunity that we have to be a really serious player and participate in one of the biggest growth sectors in this in the economy and in this century. So to everyone listening, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. If you want to read Mina's full memo and be part of these conversations, head to buildcanada.com. You can view the memo there and you can sign up there to join our community. And thanks again to you, Mina, for joining us this morning. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you to Build Canada. Super excited to build here and build now.